When does the Age of Aquarius begin? Besides the 12 signs and Mercury retrograde, the Age of Aquarius may well be one of the best known concepts in all of astrology. It's one of those relatively rare astrological ideas that pretty much everyone, whether they're interested in the art or not, has heard of. But it's also one of the most poorly defined astrological concepts out there, particularly in terms of its timing. Because you can ask 10 astrologers when the Age of Aquarius begins, and you'll get 10 different answers. But my guest in this episode may well have done more research on the astrological ages than any other astrologer in history. His name is Terry MacKinnell, and he has come to a striking conclusion about the Aquarian age, that we've already been living in it for almost 600 years. In this episode, we're going to dig into Terry's dating of the Aquarian age. We're going to understand how he came to his conclusions and how our confusion about the dating of the astrological ages may be due to a fundamental misunderstanding of how they actually work and how ancient people would have seen them.
All astrologers have been half an age out in their calculation because they're calculating it based on a mathematical technique, but the zodiacal constellations were defined prior to mathematical techniques. And all astronomers tell you that the technique of ancient astronomers were all visual.
This is World Astrology Report. I'm your host, Dan Waits, and welcome to another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. If you're enjoying this video so far, then please do me a big favor and click the like button, subscribe to the channel and enable notifications. It really helps to let the algorithm know that people want to watch these videos. And remember that all of my episodes, including this one, have a full members version that you can watch ad-free by joining the channel here on YouTube or by becoming a member of World Astrology Report at worldastrologyreport.com. Membership on the website is a bit better value because it also gives you access to my monthly long-form live streams where I go deep into the astrology and the kind of weird and wonderful topics that we get into on this channel. Signing up means that you can watch all my previous streams right now. The next stream will be taking place on June the 21st at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. It's called The Hermetic Age, Astrology, Secrecy, and Breakaway Civilizations. And it's going to get into some pretty wild stuff that I hope you're going to enjoy. Some prominent figures in the alternative research community, including Richard Dolan, Joseph Farrell, and Catherine Fitz, have talked extensively about the existence of such a breakaway civilization with access to vast amounts of secret financing, as well as knowledge and technology that the rest of us can only dream of. In this talk, we'll consider how astrology might offer confirmation that a secret breakaway civilization with access to advanced technology really does exist. And we'll consider the hermetic undercurrents of the current times, indicated by conjunctions of Pluto and Neptune taking place in the sign of Gemini, the sign of Hermes, aka Mercury. Like it or not, we are being governed through principles of secrecy, which means that certain knowledge is hermetically sealed and reserved for a select few. We'll consider what all this tells us about where the world is heading and ask a pointed question: is the breakaway civilization about to break back in? You can purchase entry to this stream on the live streams page of my website, but members of worldastrologyreport.com get access to all the streams included in their membership package. Thanks for listening, and now back to the video. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of the Age of Aquarius and Terry's dating of it, let's start off by explaining some basic ideas. The astrological ages are defined by the precession of the equinoxes. What precession essentially means is that the stars that are rising at a fixed time of the year, usually taken as the spring equinox, are gradually shifting backwards through the zodiac at the rate of about 1 degree every 72 years.
When I was at school, I was taught the first two orbital movements of the Earth, but no one teaches the third one. So the first one is that the Earth spins on its axis. The second one is the Earth then goes around the Sun in a 1 year period. But the third one is that the Earth behaves like a spinning top, like it's spinning and it's going around, but a spinning top wobbles. A spinning top doesn't just stay stationary. Even if it's stationary in position, it will wobble. And the Earth wobbles, and it takes 26,000 years for one wobble. But because that wobble is really the key component of the seasons, what it means is the seasons keep changing in relation to the fixed stars. If you went out tonight and looked at the sky and looked at, found some constellations and whatever, and if you could be reborn and come back in 13,000 years to the same location or the same dates, and you looked up at the sky, you're looking at the exact opposite half of the sky. Not one star or constellation you would see at that point. You would see 13,000 years before or after, because the Earth is spun.
This gives us a great cycle, often called the Great Year or the Platonic Year, of roughly 26,000 years, or a little less. And I think that understanding this greater cycle is something that astrologers really need to put more effort into, because without knowing where we are in the larger cycle, we can't really know where we're heading or why the world looks the way that it does. Now, there are at least two methods of dividing up the Great Year into shorter periods that help us to understand where we are in history. One of them is the Yuga cycle, which I covered extensively in this 2-hour live stream, available for World Astrology Report members on my website. And I also covered this theme in 2 videos with Bibhu Dev Misra, which you can find here on YouTube. But the method that's most popular in the West is the astrological ages, which divide the Great Year into 12 periods of roughly 2,160 years each, assigned to each of the 12 zodiac signs. A key thing to bear in mind is that these ages shift in reverse zodiacal order. So the age of Aries gives way to the age of Pisces, which is followed by the age of Aquarius, and so on and so forth. These ages set the tone for major themes in the period, particularly those that have to do with our spiritual beliefs. Remember, precession is really defined by the interaction between the tropical and sidereal zodiacs, and thus with the connection between earthly life and the celestial realm.
Working with the sidereal zodiac when I was doing the Hindu astrology side and with the tropical zodiac, I therefore learned how the ages were constructed, which is basically the difference between the two zodiacs.
The age of Pisces, the last sign of the zodiac, is one that is very conscious of the approaching end of the zodiacal cycle. It's symbolized by 2 fish and saw the emergence of the 2 biggest religions in the world, Christianity and Islam, both of which emphasize themes of sacrifice, martyrdom, and eschatology. Now, in the late 19th century came an occult revival, primarily driven by theosophists who proclaimed the birth of a new age.
Any percent was proclaiming, look, this is a new age, our new understanding, or that kind of thing. I don't think the term Age of Aquarius was ever used before the 20th century. There is no record of it. I've got a really good book written in 1811, and it's always the vernal point is in this constellation. Isaac Newton, he talks about the vernal point immensely through his books, but never talks about an age of Aquarius or an Aquarian age. So the age of Aquarius is actually quite modern. It's only about 125 years old.
The great Carl Jung wrote about the Aquarian age in his book Ion, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self. And then came the 1960s and that song from the rock musical Hair. Suddenly, everyone knew about the dawning age of Aquarius. And interestingly, there was a remarkable astrological configuration at the start of the 1960s that really did single out the sign of Aquarius. On February the 5th of 1962 came a conjunction of all 7 of the traditional planets in the sign of the water pourer. That is a hell of a lot of Aquarius, perhaps even too much. Anyway, one of the major problems with the Age of Aquarius is that astrologers haven't really agreed on exactly when it should start. Part of the problem is that we have very little in the way of guidance from ancient texts on how these ages should be defined. Perhaps surprisingly, traditional astrologers didn't have anything much to say about these ages. One of the main issues is that the 12 constellations of the zodiac are actually different sizes, and there is space between the stars that comprise them. Of course, a period of 2,000 years of history is a long time, and especially when we go further back in time, the patchiness of the historical record makes it hard to decide where the boundaries should begin. Some astrologers associate Pisces with Christianity and simply say that the age of Pisces began with the coming of Christ. But who's to really say that the avatar of the age must arrive at its very beginning? But Terry came up with an ingenious solution to this problem, a way to figure out exactly when the Age of Aquarius began. And what allowed him to do this was his training not only in Western astrology, but in the Vedic tradition. The idea to try to answer the question of when the Age of Aquarius began came to Terry all of a sudden one day in 1987.
I lived in an area, Byron Bay, where, it's a little bit like Woodstock or something. It was a very alternative sort of area. I was quite aware of the Age of Aquarius. And I remember just all of a sudden, it was in a winter's afternoon. I remember lying on the balustrade of our veranda in the sun because it was winter and I was just soaking up sun. And all of a sudden, it just came to my head. It was, when did the Age of Aquarius arrive?
In astrology, rectification is the process of doing astrology backwards. It's done when we don't know a client's birth time. The astrologer asks the client when major events happen in their life and then works backwards to try to figure out what their birth time must have been. Terry did something similar, but the object of the rectification was the historical record itself, and the goal was to generate a timeline for the astrological ages.
And so in my head, I formulated an approach over the next half hour of how I would find out it was done. And then I took 6 weeks to get it down to the right century, using a particular technique that I don't think any other astrologer had ever used, nor were they aware of.
The key insight he came to is that in Indian and traditional astrology, the signs aren't just uniform 30-degree blocks. There are many ways of dividing the signs into smaller portions. And one of them is the division of each sign into 12, known in Hellenistic astrology as the Dodekatemoria, and in Vedic astrology as the Dwadashamsas, and in English as the 12 parts.
When I first started learning astrology in the early 70s, I had never encountered an astrologer for the first decade. I didn't know anything about astrologers. And so I learnt all from books and magazines. And in this magazine, I was reading in about 1972 or 73, they were explaining how you could divide the zodiacal signs into 12 using what they told them the Indian term Dwadasamsha, and not associating with astrologers or astrology associations. I just sort of assumed that this is what people did. So I started employing these 1/12ths of a sign. So I had this knowledge of these 1/12. So naturally, when I'm sitting on my balustrade thinking, I wonder where the Age of Aquarius is, all of a sudden I realized, well, hold on. Why wouldn't I divide the ages into 1/12ths? Because I had direct experience that this worked in natal horoscopy, so why wouldn't it work there?
Interestingly, Terry wasn't the only astrologer to think of doing this, but others took a really odd approach to it. They decided that the first 12th part of the Age of Aquarius should belong to Aquarius. That's normally how the 12 parts work. The first 12th part of any sign belongs to the sign itself, but the astrological ages apply backwards. So the first 12th part of the Age of Aquarius should actually be the last of the 12 in the sign, which belongs to Capricorn.
To figure out where a 2,150-year period starts is much harder than working out a series of 178-year periods.
After working hard on this process of rectification, Terry arrived at a dating for the Age of Aquarius. It wasn't beginning right around now or in a couple of hundred years. It had actually begun in the 15th century.
And I still got that cardboard. I had two pieces of cardboard, one with the dates and historical events. The other was in the same scale with all the astrological sub-ages. And I would sort of move them, slide them a little bit, right? And it wouldn't fit because I was trying to force an Aquarius age in for now, like the 1960s and 70s and 80s, where everyone was assuring me that it started. And then all of a sudden I got frustrated. I just moved this really long way. And all of a sudden everything lined up, like all the sub-ages and the historical events, like the Renaissance, the Age of Exploration, the Scientific Revolution, the population explosion, the nuclear age. Everything just went like round pegs in a round hole.
After singling out a few different years, he eventually arrived on his current favoured exact year for the age's beginning, 1433. And interestingly, this is pretty close to the time when historians say the medieval era ended and the early modern era began.
We'll start with the Pisces age because that's concluded. That started at 715 BC and it finished in 1433. If you're a historian, you'll notice very quickly that the Pisces age started within a few decades of the founding of ancient Rome, and 1433 occurred 20 years before the final fall of Rome with the fall of Constantinople. If you look at the previous age, which is the Aries age, which commenced in 2862 BC and finished in 715, that aligns almost perfectly with ancient Egypt and their three kingdoms. They had the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom, and they fit in with the decans. the decans of the ages almost perfectly. And then 1433 Aquarius, well, that's only a few decades before the most momentous discovery in the world by human beings, that the world was circular. It was the beginning of globalization. It was the most fundamental century in the last 1,000 years. Historians can sense that the new age commenced in the 15th century. If you even go to Wikipedia, it will tell you that early modernity appeared in the 15th century. But early modernity is still modernity. It doesn't matter. It still has the word modernity in it.
If you cling to the idea that the Age of Aquarius must represent a kind of golden age of egalitarianism, technological advancement, and spiritual connection, then you're probably going to resist this idea. But bear in mind that the ages take time to assert themselves. And consider too that Aquarius isn't all puppies and rainbows. In traditional astrology, after all, it was ruled by the Dark Lord, Saturn. But there's another reason why Terry's dating of the Aquarian age to the early 15th century makes sense, and it has to do with how astrology was practiced by very ancient people. There's an important fact to bear in mind to understand Terry's dating of the Age of Aquarius, and it has to do with how astrology has been practiced through history. Astrologers can do astrology today without ever looking up at the sky. Most of them use software that performs all the necessary calculations and tells them where the planets are on their screens. But in earlier times, astrology was a visual art, not a mathematical one. What was important to very ancient people was what you could actually see in the sky.
The person who invented it in modern times, and I'm using modern with inverted, is an astronomer called Hipparchus. He lived in the 2nd century BC in Rhodes, in Greece, and he was the key astronomer of that time. He basically developed the system that we have in place now, but he was unaware that people prior to him had knowledge of precession and equinoxes, in the sense that they had knowledge of the constellations changing their position in the sky. But unfortunately, he developed a system that was wrong. And even though it measures precession, it measures precession incorrectly. Because in ancient times, the 2 solstices and 2 equinox points are always the most 4 important points in the year. And he zoned in on the vernal equinox, or the equinox around about the 21st of March. And so he decided that, okay, where the position of the sun was on that day would be the calibration for the astrological ages. So in his day, like if the sun on the vernal equinox, the 21st of March, was situated, say, in the constellation of Aries, he was in the Aries age, okay? But what he didn't realize is that the ancients, when they defined the zodiacal constellations, they didn't use that technique, because that's a mathematical technique. Because you think of it, think of the 21st of March, there you are, you want to know what constellation the sun is in. Well, you can never see it, because when the sun's out, you can't see any stars. But that's not how ancient people worked. They worked visually. Hipparchus employed a mathematical technique, but the ancients didn't use mathematical techniques. They just used exclusively, or almost exclusively, visual techniques.
In particular, the ancients were interested in the times when stars made what's called their heliacal rising. This is when a star or a planet first emerges from the beams of the sun and becomes visible just before dawn, before the sun rises and drowns out the light of the stars. Planet or star that's too close to the sun can't be seen. In Hellenistic astrology, a planet was said to be under the beams of the sun when it was within 15 degrees of its center. That's half a zodiac sign. It's very well known that the ancient Egyptians used the heliacal rising of the star Sirius to time their new year. The year was said to begin when Sirius made its heliacal rise, which happened roughly in mid-July, and coincided with the annual flooding of the Nile, which brought life-giving silt and water to the Nile Valley and made the land ready for cultivation once again. Terry argues that when we're trying to gauge which astrological age we're in, we should be looking at which constellation is actually visible at dawn on the spring equinox each year, not the sign where the sun is actually found.
The ancient technique was to go out an hour before the sunrise. An hour before sunrise, you can see all the stars. Very quickly after that hour, they all disappear. And so the last constellation rising up on the eastern horizon, an hour before dawn, that's the way the very ancients measured these constellations.
And so, by this logic, most datings of the beginning of the Age of Aquarius are actually about half a sign or more than 1,000 years out.
But you have to appreciate that 1 hour represents 15 degrees movement of the Earth, 15 degrees of a constellation. In other words, in that 1 hour from the helical rising one to Hipparchus' technique, 1 hour has transpired, which is 15 degrees, and that's half an age. So all astrologers from him on have been half an age out in their calculation because they're calculating it based on a mathematical technique, but the zodiacal constellations were defined prior to mathematical techniques. And all astronomers tell you that the technique of ancient astronomers were all visual.
Terry discovered this after he'd already rectified the Age of Aquarius using his historical method, and it served as confirmation that he was on the right track, because the constellation of Aquarius was becoming visible in the night sky around an hour before dawn back in the 15th century. But there's another important factor that you need to understand about the astrological ages if you truly want to understand the times we're living in, and it's this: they act more like waves than blocks. Something that's crucial to understand about Terry's conception of the astrological ages is that they blend into one another.
There's a very important point to understand. If you want to understand the ages, you have to understand they are not bricks in a wall. They're waves. And if you think of them as bricks in the walls, you'll never understand them.
When a given age begins, the influence of the sign starts at 0. Its power builds and builds over time, so that it's at its most powerful and it's truly permeated the times at the end of the age, not at the start. At the same time, the influence of the preceding sign declines over the course of the age.
The ages go backwards through the zodiac. But the problem is, signs are strongest at their beginnings and weakest at their ends, because the beginning of any sign starts with a decan of the same sign and starts with a 1/12 of the same sign. So all the power is at the beginning of that sign, and then it's far less at the end. But when we are dealing with astrological ages, we're entering each sign at the end, not the beginning.
What this means is that when the Age of Aquarius began in the early 15th century, the influence of Pisces was at its height.
The age of a Pisces, it's built up this incredible momentum, and it comes to 1433, and it's not a speeding train hitting a cliff. No, it then is like a tsunami. It then breaks like a tsunami and washes over the next age, while the next age is appearing at its weakest point.
And if we think about European history, well, the Catholic Church really peaked in power in the high medieval period from around 1050 to 1300 AD, when the Church was not only the spiritual power of Europe, but it held political power too. It was also during this period that the Church established the Inquisition. In the early 14th century, the Avignon papacy was established, and then from 1378 to 1417, just before Terry's dating of the beginning of the Age of Aquarius, the papacy was split in two in a Western or Papal schism. There were bishops in both Avignon and Rome claiming to be Pope. If you follow my channel regularly, you'll know that around this time in 1398 and 1399 came 3 conjunctions of Pluto and Neptune, which come every 500 years. These conjunctions seem to drive some of the deepest and most powerful trends in human societies, the intersection between Pluto, power, and Neptune, faith. These conjunctions came in the sign of Gemini, which represented a big shift because for the previous 2,500 years, they'd taken place over and over in the sign of Taurus. I see a move from the feudal era, Taurus, to the modern era, Gemini, at this time. It's interesting that Terry has the Age of Aquarius beginning very soon after this shift. That poses interesting questions about how these different layers of astrological cycles actually work. When I first saw Terry's work, I initially wondered if he was seeing the effect of these Pluto-Neptune conjunctions and interpreting that as the dawning of the Aquarian age. But Terry's rectification process isn't just based on what changed in the 15th century, it's much more comprehensive than that. And I've come to a different perspective since then, one similar to Terry's.
Imagine a stage, and on the stage you've got this beautiful backdrop, beautiful painted scenery and whatever. And then on the stage floor, you've got these characters running around. Well, The characters running around there are your planets. And the stage, the back view stage, they're the ages and their subperiods. The planetary actors have no effect whatsoever on the backdrop. The backdrop couldn't care less what they're doing. About the backdrop provides context for the actors. But that's all.
I wonder if the astrological ages provide the basic tone to the times. It's then the planet's job, or perhaps the archons who are entwined with them, to actually bring what the ages demand into manifestation. Another interesting thing I've come across is the Austrian clairvoyant Rudolf Steiner's dating of the astrological ages. Steiner said that the age of Pisces began around the year 1413, and that the age of Aquarius wouldn't begin until the year 3573. But Terry's idea of overflows means that Steiner actually agrees with Terry's dating of the ages, because according to this conception, the Piscean influence would actually be at its maximum when the age of Aquarius begins. Steiner, as a clairvoyant, may have been seeing things as they actually were. He may have been perceiving the early 15th century as a time of maximal Piscean influence, hence why his dating of the ages is one sign out. Let's round this off by considering what it means to be in the age of Aquarius, but heavily under the influence of Pisces. According to Terry's dating, we're still just 600 years into the age of Aquarius. What this also means is that the influence of Pisces actually remains stronger than Aquarius, although the Aquarian impulse is growing steadily.
The overflow from the Pisces age is the most powerful sign in the world, but the energy of the Aquarius age is the most powerful emergent sign. Pisces is more powerful at this point, and you can just look out the world and see that. Pisces is more powerful than Aquarius, but Pisces cannot get rid of Aquarius because it's got the emergent power, and Aquarius cannot get rid of Pisces because it's entrenched. It's got the substance. And so every age is a battlefield between the previous age and the current one.
We're actually at a time when the Aquarian is growing, but spiritually, we remain rooted in Piscean influence. The two big Age of Pisces religions, Christianity and Islam, remain very strong. And so, according to Terry's scheme, we should really be calling this the Age of Pisces Aquarius. Each age broadly represents a mix of the influence of two signs. The previous age that began in 715 BC was Aries Pisces, and the next will be Aquarius Capricorn, beginning in the year 3581. Thinking of our times as a mashup between Aquarius and Pisces makes a lot of sense. We see this dichotomy playing out in all sorts of ways in the world. The two main Piscean religions, Christianity and Islam, remain strong, but they're competing with humanism, atheism, and the New Age, among other things. We can also think of American politics, for example, where we have a divide between the Christian right and the liberal left, which could be said to span the Pisces-Aquarius divide too.
So like when you look at Ukraine, Ukraine's taking the standard bearer for Aquarius. You've got Russia, the standard bearer for Pisces. You've got this whole battle that's been going on since the 1433. But as the age goes through, further forward, the emergent Aquarius will get more powerful and the entrenched Pisces will get weaker.
Something that a lot of smart thinkers have pointed out is how modern left liberal politics is still deeply rooted in Christian values. Christianity preached compassion for the downtrodden, the poor, and the outcasts of the world. Leftism, at least in theory, takes these as its primary values, but then it takes God out of the equation. And so we get a kind of hybrid between elements of Pisces and Aquarius.
Actually, if you want to tell the truth, the main correlation to Pisces is corporations. This is why we live in a corporation-mad world, because you've got to realize in the age of Aquarius that we're in, the strongest sign is Pisces. Now, Pisces rules what is fake, what is illusion, what is delusion, what is smoke and mirrors. Well, a corporation has legal rights, but there's no body. You follow me? A corporation is pure Pisces. And they first started appearing within a century of the arrival of the age of Aquarius, when Pisces moved out of being in its formative stage to being the dominant sign in the world. The main influence I put to Pisces is corporations and salvation religions. It rules everything to do with the ocean. So that's why when Pisces was peaking in the 15th century, when it went into explosion mode, all of a sudden the Europeans were off discovering the world with their boats. The whole modern world was based on the fact that the Portuguese wanted to bypass the Arab traders sitting in the Middle East, and they wanted to get the cardamom and the pepper and everything directly from its source. That's all ruled by Pisces. And that's why we've got this globalized modern world full of corporations. It's because they were after herbs and spices. And of course, naturally, Pisces includes drugs, you know what I mean? So there's your tea, your black tea, there's your tobacco, there's your marijuana and all the drugs. It's like that's all being completely fed through by Pisces. The greatest example of Pisces in the world today is the United States. It's a combination of Pisces and Aquarius, but Pisces is the senior partner. And you can see that's even being played out right now. When the Age of Aquarius started in 1433, what's the first sub-age? Capricorn. But Capricorn's the next age. So every age starts with a sub-age of the next age. So when the Pisces age started, it started with an Aquarius sub-age, and that's where you had the whole development of democracy in ancient Greece. And that's also where Buddha was. And Buddha is one of the strongest growing religions in the Age of Aquarius. In other words, Buddha's having a resurgence in the Age of Aquarius. Because he's obviously, and if you read Buddha, he's got a lot of Aquarian type of things in there that they don't sort of capture so much in Christianity or Islam.
Now, there's actually a lot more to Terry's work on the ages that we haven't covered so far in this video. In particular, he has applied various traditional systems of dividing up the zodiac signs in order to understand the ages better. One of them is the 36 decans, which are 10-degree divisions of the zodiac. Each sign contains 3 of these decans, which are assigned to the 3 signs in the same triplicity or element as the primary sign. So the 3 decans of the Age of Aquarius are assigned to Aquarius, Gemini, and Libra. But remember, with astrological ages, we're moving backwards around the zodiac. So the first of the 3 decans we'll experience is actually the Libra decan, which will last from 1433 to 2149. In the full version of this video, available for members of World Astrology Report, whether here on YouTube or at worldastrologyreport.com, we look at the Libra decan and consider what it means for 2 of the major themes Terry associates with it: the rise of female equality and war. Thanks so much to Terry for joining me in this episode. If you found all this interesting and want to dig deeper into his work, then look no further than his blog, Demystifying the Aquarian Age, and his book, The Dawning, Shedding New Light on the Astrological Ages. I've linked them below. Oh, and one last thing. If you're interested in learning Vedic astrology, then I'd like to recommend my friend Aswin Subramanian's Diploma in Indian Astrology course, which is starting in mid-July this year. Aswin is from a long lineage of Vedic astrologers, and he's a brilliant astrologer in his own right. If you want to get a good grounding in this powerful tradition of astrology, then this course is for you. And since it's his first, it's very reasonably priced. Find a link in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, then I suggest you watch this video, in which I cover some of the same Aquarian themes, but from a very different angle. Thanks for watching, and see you again very soon.